Welcome to the Millennial Mustard Seed podcast. I'm Gary Wayne, and so happy to be back with you. And hopefully, we'll get into a few things that raise a few more eyebrows.
Gary, what can I say, man? We were just talking a minute ago, and we're the tip of the spear on that aquatic episodes we dropped a few months back. Super fascinating stuff, man. It's congratulations on a brand new book. Also, I'm going to mention that right on the top. Do you have that with you? It is the A-Primo Conspiracy, AI's Covenant with Babylon. Come on, man. What is this? What's going on here? What is this about?
Well, this is a project that my publisher wanted to do, and he's the co-author, Bill Carmichael, and he's the novelist. I'm the researcher. Writing a novel is a whole different product than doing a research book. So you could, I thought about doing it, but that's not really my expertise. I'd rather continue to work on another research book. But Bill wanted to find a way to take my research more mainstream, and how you get there is through the nonfiction market. And so if people remember the Left Behind series, I mean, it just took rapture and rapture awareness and the whole thought about end time, no matter what your eschatological view is, to a whole new awareness. And so the concept is Bill wanted to have a weighted sort of aspect on the novel in terms of how AI would affect the end time. And so what we're doing with this book is trying to present from our viewpoint today what the end time might look like and how it might come about. And understanding there's different prophetic views, but we also wanted to put into my research. So it's going to have my eschatology in it. So my end time chronology, whether or not people buy into that or not, but you have to have a standard. And I want to be able to, when I go on shows, defend how the sequence of events are coming out. And I can do it easily as of trying to figure out from every particular eschatology's approach how that would fit. That would get a little bit messy. So and I wanted to put in there, and I do put my eschatology into the introduction in terms of my standards of how I go about it. And it's a very, very high standard, I think, in the preface of book 2. So if people want to get a better idea on that. And we wanted to create how there has to be some sort of influence of demons, fallen angels, and bloodlines of the spurious offspring and their societies and how that interweaves in this. So we want to create some intrigue on it as well. So now we have to create. We didn't have to, but we've loved doing it. And so, we had to. They forced me to do it.
I didn't want to do it. Gary. You didn't have a choice, man.
Yeah, how fast can I get involved on this? So we wanted to give them a genealogical history. And we wanted to put them into societies. And we decided on the societies, we wanted to have enough real ones in there. But we also wanted to have some fiction license, so we put in some other ones that may be similar to other ones. And so we create these profiles of these characters. And so we have, one fella who is Elias Vilak, and he's introduced, and we talk about him from the beginning as being spoken of as a false prophet, or the false prophet, sort of whispered. So this is sort of early on. So, and he's a major character in the show because the false prophet is right there, even at Armageddon with Antichrist. So in this, we gave him a bloodline that's going to go back to Petra and the Amalekite giants.
Oh my gosh, come on, this is cool.
And then when we get into book 2, and the sequel's already coming out, we want to make sure that we have him tied back to a bloodline in Israel. And just as we introduce an Antichrist figure, we give him a bloodline, but in book 2, we're going to want to give him also a bloodline that links back to the tribe of Judah. And so we're going to be weaving that grafting or psioning in, as I like to talk about, of the nobleness of these pedigrees. And all the names that are in the book for the main characters are kind of Google worthy. So you want to, look at what Elias Velak might mean. Well, Elias is the Greek version of Elijah. Elijah is the one who
Oh,
makes the way for Antichrist. And Elijah brings fire down from the sky, just as the false prophet will do. And then Velak is the flip side. Let's get into the fringes here. So
okay.
it means in Slavic, it means big and great. And Slavic, as in the Scythians, Indo-Aryans, Indo-Europeans, Tuatha De Danann, in that branch of them. And it also means fair and pale white skinned. So now we're talking about giant descriptions, right? And we've taken them
Oh
back
man.
to an Alekim blood type. And it's a Celtic clan as well, specifically with red hair. So you have red hair giants, and for one example, in the Bible, you would have the Horim giants who have red hair. And so we give him a organization that he belongs to called the Black Root Circle. So Black Root, you use that for, in the movie Roots, in terms of the genealogies that sort of go way back, but it's not really based on that, but the spiritual black side of it. And that the circle is the main imagery of polytheism, like wheel worship,
So you're
right?
hitting so close to the actual research, tangible
Yes.
groups, history. And no disrespect to Kirk Cameron from
Yeah.
the Left Behind series, but
Yeah.
this is so much better. I'm so happy that you're
Yeah.
stepping in the mainstream and
Yeah.
taking a swing at this, because it really does heighten and swell all this information, all your contrarian work, and many others out there like me and you who we have a template for it. Now everybody else is going to get one. Thank you,
Yeah, so
Barry.
those are the types of things that we're going to do it. So, and just to finish off on, I won't go through all the characters, but just to give people a glimpse as to, this book is layered as a novel, as a fiction, but it's got reality that it's being based on. It's almost mythopoetic.
Oh my gosh, come on, Mythopoetic. I love that.
Yeah, so it's based on actual characters and actual people out of prehistory and real eschatology. And the black aspect of it, think of it as, and particularly as the false prophet's going to be um, used as an end time prophecy in his key role, think of the wheat and the tares. And the tares is the
Yes.
black kernel of the wheat that's being separated, right? So,
It's ringing a bell for the checkered floor idea within the Freemasons, right? Like
oh
there's the
yeah,
false guys
yeah,
and there's the white hats and black hats, and little do they know
yeah.
that even within their own sphere, one group is set to fall in order to heighten or raise up this other
Yeah,
hat.
and so just as we're going to have a false Christ, we'll have a true Christ in the novel, and just as there is a true flame, there's a false flame in terms of the allegory for the Holy Spirit. And so flame is an important terminology that goes through it. Anyways, it's an intrigue, and we don't get that far into the book. Actually, Bill wanted to get it done in one book, and I said, "You're not even going to get through the seals." He says, "Oh, no, no, no. No, and I don't want it to be a book the size of your books. This is a novel." So it's already, became twice as long as he wanted to do it, but we only got to the third seal and an introduction of the fourth seal. And we wanted to see, it's still 300 pages, so it's not a short book, but it's not a super long book, and there's lots of dialogue in it. So,
Is this going to go on Audible at some point in time?
yes, it's being
Okay.
worked on right now. I got to listen to the first three chapters of it with the different voices and stuff, and you have to pick voices, and you're not real sure how that's going to mix and intertwine until it sort of comes together. So, but with a novel, we wanted to have several voices because there's so many different characters.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's going to be top tier because the pronunciation on some of the names and
Yeah,
things that you got going on there. Yeah, that's so exciting. So the Opprimo Conspiracy, and
conspiracy,
that's
and that's a Latin
available
word.
now.
Yes, and the
Okay.
Opprimo is the allegory for the AI technology, the Opprimo wall.
Oh,
And again, not that we put it in the book, but just so that people sort of give an idea is I wanted something that we could sort of go back biblically, even though in my research I go back to high technology before, but there's a wall, a hand that writes on a wall in Daniel. So that was kind of the premise for the wall, and this huge bank of computers, like they put up in these data centers. But this has got to be significant because of what its capabilities are going to be. So, primo is a Latin word for oppress, to crush, and words that are associated with the Seventh Empire of iron and clay. So it's going to have a big impact on Babylon and the Seventh Empire as it makes its path forward for Antichrist and his system. So this is designed for the Babylon beast system that Antichrist will take to one more level up.
and not to get into the aquatic stuff because in the future, we're gonna make some more connections, I believe, right? Because this is what your 13th, 14th appearance, so that we're just gonna keep
There's a
doing it.
few.
But I was thinking when you were talking about these AI data centers in even in the thread with the Opprimo conspiracy and how all of it webs together, they need a lot of water
Oh,
to cool down these AI data centers. And they're picking remote areas, I've
yeah.
heard, right?
Two key things that impact human numbers.
Yes.
And how we're going to be viewed as a competitor to the AI entities. So
That's
yes,
so crazy.
huge amounts of water to cool. And I know they're going to work on that, but they're not
Yeah.
ever going to resolve that. So
No. It
countries
really
countries that have a lot of water are going to be targeted. They're going to have to be targeted for that resource. And then you're going to want to probably make the advancement of the technologies close to the water to make it more efficient. So now we become a competitor on water because it's a massive amount that it takes to cool things. And the more you develop the AI, the more cooling that you need. But even more scarier
yeah.
is the energy that it requires. So in 2023,
Progressive whatever we're talking now, we can't comprehend how much energy it's going to require in 10 years from now,
yeah,
right?
we
Is
can.
that the concept?
Yeah, we can. And it's absolutely frightening. Some
Okay.
numbers that I have is like in 2023 in the US, 4% of the total electric output of the US went to data centers and the development of AI. 4%. That was 2023. This year it's going to go 6 to 7%. And it's hitting the point where we're going to start to see where we started to see a couple of years ago the impact of this of brownouts in California and
Yeah,
other
that's right.
locations.
Yeah.
You're going to see more of that. But by 2028, they expect it to hit 20%. And by 2030, 35%. And by 2035, 50%. And you can't build fast enough to do that.
No.
And that if you're going to be in an
It's
arms
disturbing.
race of AI, that means you're going to have to funnel all of your resources to keep up, or you could be taken over by other rising powers who are using AI in their military. And now you can
Yeah.
imagine all of this has to go to self-defense. And we become a
Yeah.
competitor for the water and for the electricity. And in the meantime, those who run this world have been chasing us off fossil fuels and into electricity in massive, criminally negligent ways and aspects to enforce it for going forward, and with no way to supply it. So you have like New York, for example, going all of their appliances essentially electric. Well, how are they going to be able to supply that? You want all electric vehicles? How are you going to be able to supply that? You can't. So now you get a chance to just crush and oppress the people because you have to
Is this going to
have that
thrust us
resource.
back into like a stone age? Is this a part of
Well,
the reset agenda?
it'll reestablish the four class feudal system. It'll push the middle class back down where they want it to go. So it's a perfect contrived catastrophe with a contrived created technology to eventually destroy us from the face of the earth.
And so, all right, this bridges perfectly kind of into what I was thinking for today's episode, because once again, the water thing, we're going to come back to it with the aquatic kingdoms and the legalities and the multi-layered kind of stacked perspectives of how all that feeds into this bigger picture. One caveat I do got to hash out before I ask the first question: the pyramids, right? Water underneath of the pyramids.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be interesting if with these AI data centers, there's a purpose, a manipulation, a control factor in mind to subjugate the surface level waters, right? For structuring, frequency attacks, whatever they want to do with it, and just digitizing the resource, right? Literally making a digital asset out of the physical water on the earth. But I think they're also going to be tapping into the waters down below, right? Because
Yes.
most wells are dug 1,
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 500 feet underground,
Yes.
which is the bridge of what I want to talk about today. I want to talk
Yeah.
about underground bases and cave systems, Gary,
Yeah.
because, oh man, there's so much here, and I know you could bring so much to the table on it. So let me just throw something out there and let's start from there. There's a map that is saved in Google, and it is the star systems that mirror the cave systems in the state parks of the United States of America. So there's a direct correlation to star configurations at certain times of the year as to underground cave networks that are represented in USA state parks. The DUMBs, deep underground military bases, whatever we'd like to call them. Gary, just open it up and let's see what direction we start to flow into on these topics.
So we should understand ancient caves and networks of caves as being ancient. We may be adding to them. We may be renovating them. But we should be looking at this as an ancient technology and to factor in that nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow. And it's going to be like the days of Noah. So in the end time, if it's going to be like the days of Noah and our technology is where it's at, and I know we've covered this sort of concept off probably numerous times on your shows, we're just catching up to that ancient technology. So it's not surprising you're going to have cities like Petra that is mostly underground, that is antediluvian, and no explanation for who built it adequately from secular history, and how they built it. You have Göbekli Tepe, another underground cities. You have other ones. And if you go to the older cities, they have ancient catacombs, like in Rome, like in Paris, and in other ancient cities of the beast empires. This is a standard operational MO, an architectural MO, where the true elite can do things in secret. And it's protection. Could be protection from destruction by fire, could be protection from possibly a flood, although I find it difficult that you could generate enough air down there, but who knows what they have access to technology or air supply that we may not know about. So we need to understand that this is something that we should be very much aware of. And when the U.S. was settled, and so you could probably say this is an ancient tradition, because it is, based on some of the things that we've just talked about. They would send, they as in the upper two classes, the Elim, the Elites, the noble ones, Indo-Aryan giant descendants, royales. They would send not their first scion or first son of inheritance, but other siblings of the larger family to the New World to spearhead and to set up and to organize. And in that, they would claim every new city with a town square. If that is familiar, it's all over North America, and it comes from Europe, and it comes from the ancient way of doing things. And in that square, that is represented on a Masonic temple that's in the town square in all of these cities that they claim for themselves with legal rights, where you have this sort of cross, these four quadrants, and they would claim that as the town square, and you'd have a legal building on the north side and the south side. So you would have like a police station, courtrooms, fire station, anything to do with power. They would do the north and south axis and then pick two churches they controlled for the east and west axis. And then they would dig underneath in tunnels where they could do things in secrecy, and massive amounts of tunnels. So downtown Toronto has massive amount of tunnels. This New York has massive amount of tunnels. This is a standard. You don't have to go too far to see there's a pattern here. And so they've planned this out very well. And it's like for what? Well, only for disaster of some sort. And what's really interesting, just to bring it to a point, and then we can move on, is in Revelation 6, in the opening of the seals. At the end of Revelation 6, there is so much destruction, it looks apocalyptic. There's 25% death in the world. There is 25% destruction of the vegetation, of the water. 25% of everything is destroyed. And it is so bad, people think it's the wrath of the Lamb. God doesn't declare it's the wrath. John doesn't say it's the wrath. The angel doesn't say it's the wrath. In fact, that doesn't happen until Revelation 14 and in the year of the Lord's wrath in Isaiah 34 and Isaiah 63. But they think it is. Things have got out of control. So what are they doing? They're going into caves. So how do we understand that as it comes down through our history is well, like mountain caves, these small, unprepared locations. That's not what John is describing as a reaction to this kind of event. They're only going into caves because they know they're going to get some sort of protection there. Those caves are not for the average person. Those caves are going to be for the elite, the top two classes. And it's going to be for the military survivability, for the technology and the knowledge and everything that sort of goes with it. And then whatever else they might have for an ability, but to put in there. But these have been prepared for millennia for the destruction by fire that they want to have happen as their Lord Maitreya, their new Buddha, is coming as an incarnation of Shiva or Mitra, who brings fire of destruction in the end time and incarnates as a Messiah-type figure and then recreates a new world out of that destruction in their belief system.
Okay, Gary, so crazy, man. Things are popping off in my head. You got my wheel turning again. You definitely got the audience's wheels turning too. So this mirroring of like the stars with the underground bases, it makes me think like it might be an attempt of building the cave tunnel networks to mirror celestial gods as like an attempt of like, hey, we've honored our underground patterns and right tunnels to mimic you as like a form of maybe alliance or protection or something, because the scripture's going to say that they cry even for the rocks to fall and to cover them from the face of him who's coming. Yeah. And now from a positive perspective, against this via negativa that I just shared with the occult's doing, the Bible says that the earth itself moans and groans for our identity to be made known unto us. And it's something with like Petra, for example, or any of these ancient sites. I think that with knowledge increasing, knowledge growing, and we are the sons of God who are experiencing this time slot of bringing forth great exploits, if I can say it that way, I think that there's also an unlocking or a redemption purpose in understanding these underground cave systems, the ancient ones, more or less, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah.
two
So
points?
let's start right back from what you laid out at the beginning. And one thing I didn't cover off because you talked about it in the opening is that what the heck is the celestial alignments being done in association with this? And that takes technology, and this is a pattern. This is an MO again. So that if you look at anything in polytheism that they built, it was to honor the pantheon of the gods, and specifically for ones that they might have a genealogical lineage back to for extra protection because of that that specific sort of worship that would be applied with it. And that not only would they have celestial alignments, like with the Sphinx and the pyramids, for example, with those celestial alignments, one just mimicking Orion for number one, and then an association for the exact positioning of Orion in 10,500 for the Sphinx and its location, if I've recalled those details correctly. But people sort of, you're starting to get an understanding. There's how could ancient people do that? Hey, we haven't even asked how they could build the pyramids, but how could they do that with that type of masonry that we can't do today? Yeah, there's a technology we're still catching up to, and we always need to underline that. But also, sacred geometry is in there as well, and also earth ratios built in. This is showing something that is going to not only last for millennia, but to demonstrate that this is a superior intelligence that is deriving this. And so in polytheism, what
Wow.
they did was they had, four main sort of goals. When they formed the seven sacred sciences, as I talk about in book one, into the mystical religions, and it becomes a knowledge religion. That's why AI and knowledge, you have to associate the two. It's not secular, it's religious. They're building a religious weapon and technology for down the road, which is why it ultimately will come out in the image of the beast coming together, right? But sticking with what we're talking about here in terms of this knowledge cult, when they formed mysticism, they wanted to lead people away from God and give them an alternative. And that's what Cain starts with. Cain goes on to Enoch, who breaks the knowledge into the seven sciences, and then they create the mystical religion. But they're not just satisfied with that. They want to not give God credit for anything, and they want to slander God in the process. So, in science, you don't see anything associated with the God of the Bible or any sort of creation aspect of it, because they just were trying to move people away from God, right? And so they name everything after their gods, whether it's Sophia with AI, or it's, Apollo on a space mission, or, Dragon that's used in the space. I mean, everything to do with science is named after their history, their genealogy, their giant bloodlines, and their gods. And then the fourth thing is to honor the pantheon of the gods. So when you're honoring them, you're not just building images to honor them. They become religious sites of technology as you wed that back together. So now if you link into the pyramids and let's say ziggurats that were built around the Euphrates, and the pyramids very close to the Nile, and there's information that would suggest that the Nile ran very close into where the Sphinx and the pyramids were located, that they also located these places of architecture on energy grids and ley lines, as we would know that in sort of modern terms, and in association with all of these other sacred geometry and celestial alignments that we are talking about.
Like
So
the
now,
stars, right?
yeah,
Mimicking the stars up above.
yes,
That's crazy. So, what about underground waterways? What about, we think of ley lines as being surface and representation only, but is there an underground energy source
yes.
way
Well, and
through the waters, the
that's where it
caves?
comes from, is from the earth and up. And so they believe they use that as an allegory of the technology and of the power of the gods, because the gods live in the earth in another dimension. And you need that technology to just not only go into the earth, but to pass into that other crossing into Nibiru from Nibiru Key. Not, and everybody thinks Nibiru is planet Earth. No, it's Nibiru Key in Sumeria. Nibiru is the crossing over within the planet.
Okay.
So they don't tell you the whole story on
That's
I mean,
crazy.
can you say Nibiru is associated with the planet Earth? Absolutely. Or another planet? Absolutely. But it's associated specifically, and Key is Earth. Nibiru, Nibruki. It's a compounded word, and you have an extension into the other world. So the gods rule from the other world, Hades or Sheol, and that's where the offspring want to get to. And one can also say that survivors of the offspring, who aren't sort of visibly walking amongst us all the time, are coming through portals because they would have a technology to go back and forth. And portals is a standard doctrine within polytheism. So now, if you're saying, well, how would you be able to survive a flood if that was the disaster that was coming? Because the water would shut it out. But maybe those locations also have portals into another dimension that they would be able to somehow cross into, or would be the promise of it. So we get, like in the Ugaritic texts and other polytheist cultures, where the royals would go back and forth between the other world and this world, just as Baal did. And one of those portals would be located at Mount Hermon with the gateway of Hades. And there's portals all around the world, fairy domens and things like that. So again, as we look at the locations, as we look at the things that they put in, understand this is a comprehensive knowledge religion to worship their gods, which live in the earth in another dimension.
Wild stuff. So portals, wormholes, dimensional planes. Like, so let's talk about where this might show up in the access of the ancient pantheon, right? And even if you feel so led, help me understand the difference between a wormhole or a portal, right?
Yeah.
And then let's walk into biblically, this is not a foreign concept. Let's just go there for a second. I kind of want to clean up those definitions and understand a little bit more about portals and wormholes.
Yeah, and again, this is getting into some pretty nerdy science, but and I don't want to make light of very complicated stuff. But the simple understanding is this is angelic technology. So let's understand where we live with the information that we know. So there are three heavens biblically. One is where God lives in another dimension. We already talked about another dimension that's within the earth where the fallen angels reside. And so angelic technology, in terms of access to these worlds, physical and spiritual or interdimensional, seem to have some sort of gate or an access to it. So this technology seems to split into two. They're probably based in the same technology, but just nuanced to do something different. So as we would understand a wormhole, that's seemingly more to travel within the physical universe. But it is, as we understand the universe, we have three heavens. I talked about the one where God dwells, but then we have a heaven that's between the firmament and the earth. And the firmament, biblically, is as far as the sun, however far that is, whether it's 93 million miles away or it's less, doesn't matter. And all the planets that are in it, it includes all of those planets within the firmament. And then you have what's outside the firmament. Now, things may be restricted within the firmament as to how to access out of that, but maybe you do need a technology like a wormhole to get out of that into other parts of the physical universe, which would be akin to, but not necessarily moving into another dimension, which would be the second aspect, because in this case, the dimension of Hades is in the same location, but in a different wavelength as what the earth is. And we don't know where heaven is, but it's like the third heaven, right? So it's like it could be outside the firmament and in another dimension, which may now interconnect those. But again, we don't have biblical knowledge on that. But there is this ability to say, if you're going to have a universe of that size, you need a technology that's going to take you from one place to another place. And we have no idea what God has going around in that. Maybe nothing, maybe something to be done down the road, whatever. We don't know. We're not told biblically, but you have to be able to get there. Even if you're in a spirit form, you're going to need something that's going to get you there, and in a way that even um, sort of takes care of the issue of a day is 1,000 years, right? Because of the great distance. So you need something that's going
Yeah.
to shrink that, whether it's warp technology, overlapping, whatever. But interdimensional is something that was accessed to by not only the fallen angels, but the giants and their religion, because they access those portals and they show it in all of their entertainment. You know, you look at even simple things like in fairy tales of let's say Snow White, for just one quick sort of example. You could go into 1,000 different ways they do it, but they have this interesting goober that's in a mirror, right? That's a portal to another, and I said that tongue in cheek as a goober. It's a demonic spirit that's in that mirror, because that technology there is a window into the other dimension, whom um, the queen is speaking to.
Okay, so with this kind of stacked idea of, the heavens, and are they simultaneously side by side, but you need a certain frequency or some type of veil
Yeah,
access, right, from one to the other. It's very
yeah.
interesting.
Can I
With
just sort of get into that, just
Please,
because I'm
yeah,
sure
please
there's a
do.
lot of
Okay.
Christians out there saying, okay, he's way outside the Bible here. Even though I've done some connections, let's go to Ezekiel 39 just quickly. In Ezekiel 39, this is the Gog war in the end time. And this is in the time of the burial of the Gog army. And you have some entities that are roaming the earth within the dead army there. And they're either called travelers or passengers in the translation. And that goes back to the Hebrew word abar, and it can have a lot of different meanings. But it's also used in as a crossing, and a crossing as in death, as you get it into the books of Job and things like that. All of a sudden now, when we're talking about this bridge, this crossing, this moving into another dimension, these are Gibborim that are involved in the war in Ezekiel 38:9, which can describe giants and their disembodied spirits, likely being the passengers that go back and forth. And so now we have a biblical understanding of a crossing into death, into Hades or Sheol, as we would understand that sort of allegorically, um, and that this is happening in the end time with the development of technology, which means we're gaining knowledge to be able to tap into portal technology.
Okay, crazy, man. I'm in Ezekiel 39 right now, just going through, and yeah, the burial of Gog. What's really interesting is, indeed, the people of the land will be burying them, right? And this is going to cleanse the land,
Yeah.
right? And it's talking about, prior to that, if we went up to God's armies destroyed in Ezekiel 39, verse 1, and when you go down, not verse 1, I'm sorry, but when you go down, it talks about them being buried into the earth.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting that there's like this separation. We know in science, which I won't disrespect science or try to make light of it either, but we have the crust of the earth, we have these different layers of the earth, right? And they're almost like different realms, right? Where it's not dimensionally separate, but the realms are depicted with
Yes.
different structural. You have the crust of the earth, right, where you have clay and dirt and rock, and
Mm-hmm.
then you get into these deeper layers. And it's just really interesting that the Bible is like pointing to this stacked idea that, like, the land, the surface is clean when these entities are brought into the
Yeah,
earth.
and now
It's a
let's
very fascinating idea.
factor in that you have this slaughter as like an Armageddon-like slaughter, and it's not Armageddon, but it's Armageddon-like, and the description of the birds and stuff is very, very similar. And you'll have a allegory that's used in there, as in these bulls and bulls of Bashan that's being associated with here, that are being slaughtered.
And so, Gary, what are we doing with this idea where the Israelites are to burn the shield, the spear, the javelin for
Yeah,
7 years? Is
yeah,
this alluding to like a undoing into a jubilee, right? Because a 7 year period biblically would be a jubilee, right? A release, a forgiveness, a recompense. And so that's an interesting concept too. What type of fire are we talking about? Is there
yeah. There's a technology here because this is the war that I linked to Joel 1 and 2, which happens before Armageddon, and has the same description of this Chimera army on riders. Chimeras are riders, and both are Chimera there, which is the same as in Revelation 9. This is the counterfeit Armageddon Antichrist is going to need. So this is going to have angelic technology of weaponry, probably that can do things within the earth, interdimensional technology, all things that we're sort of moving towards. And so if you are separating in polytheism 9 realms within the other world, now you're getting into those different aspects and locations that might include like the crust that you're talking about and other locations. And if you look into the book of Enoch, into the hollow earth, as it shows it has multiple locations in there. So there's a concept here. And again, we get Hades and Sheol talked about throughout the Bible. So this is not unbiblical. And that the bulls of Bashan are understood in polytheism as bulls, as in the bull gods of the Baalim council, so fallen angels, and their offspring were known as bulls as well. So when Jesus was on the cross, he's being mocked by the bulls of Bashan. And these are the spirits of fallen angels and the spirits of disembodied giants who
well,
are
this goes
mocking
back to
them.
where David is saying in the Psalms, many strong bulls of Bashan have encompassed me, right?
Yes.
And so yeah, that's a deep connection. Now, for the sake of this, you just mentioned Sheol, right? We
Yep.
have Hades.
Yep.
We have all of this different language for hell. And I know it's been a topic of
Argata.
conversation. There you go. Well, I mean, we have these deep
Shambhala.
Shambhala, yeah, these deep pits, right? I mean, are, I take a literalist approach to the Bible, right? I think it just means what it says what it means. And I
Yeah.
think there's a stacked, layered idea where it can fit into, parabolic language, or, people say it's, oh, that's just archetype. Oh, that's just allegory. I think it's multi-layered is what God told me years ago. And I just stuck with it. The
Yeah.
multi-layered effect, the multi-layered
Yep.
reality. What are
Yep.
we doing with some of these underground locations that the Bible talks about? Is there possibly an attempt to connect tunnels to these places in order to unleash things prematurely? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, but
Yeah, I think we have to be prepared for two aspects of Hollow Earth. One is the physical realm, where you're going to have underground locations and beings that come back and forth from within the earth. But you also have that interdimensional aspect as well. And so, yes, there would be a connection to both because they're both interconnected within the hierarchy.
yeah, and there's definitely underground oceans.
And there's definitely underground oceans, underground volcanoes, underground. We have
Hmm.
no idea. It is virtually unexplored.
Why is that? I think Kash Patel mentioned something recently. I'm trying to remember, but he had said it's easier for people to. I'm paraphrasing here, okay? But the FBI director Cash says it's easier for people to understand these outer space entities than it
Yes.
would be for them to understand aquatic creatures like the
Yes.
Loch Nessie or something. You know what
Yes.
I mean?
Yeah. Well, because it's away from us. You can imagine that any way that you want. We haven't, it's not, and it hasn't been with us all along. Like it just is that cognizant dissonance when you're dealing with this that is the difficulty for people because it's been hidden from us. It's not that the polytheists haven't known this all the way through. It's their history. It's their side. And again, we haven't been taught that there's a seed war. So all of this is just upsets all of the brainwashing that we've been prepared with since childhood. So introducing these things, you can't go spectacularly deep on the first few times with people. When I first came out, over 10 years ago now, doing podcasts, people would come out. Gary Wayne just did a show and just did another massive download of information. And I was just doing the superficial stuff, because if that was considered massive amounts, you have no idea what else is going to happen if I stick around a little bit longer to talk about more things. So it is that, big of a paradigm shift in terms of your sort of perspective. So yeah, we should very much
Yeah.
understand that this is a world that's part of the visible ones that answers to the invisible ones within the hierarchy, and understand that as we move into the end time, it's the externalization of the hierarchy that's going to happen again. That's occult language. Hierarchy is the Greek word for the assembly, the sacred assembly of archons. Council of the gods is going to become externalized again. That's the Baalim Council, or the Elim Council from the Canaanite belief system, or the Mount Olympus gods, whether it's Kronos or Zeus. It's going to become visible again in the end time. And so we want to be very, very wary of that. And because her polytheist prophetic, or attempt there, was to say that begins in 2025, along with the introduction of Lord Maitreya, which is a transliteration of Mitra, the one who incarnates into Antichrist, or Shiva. They're the same god in this, and Azazel, as we
Oh, this is
look at them.
interesting.
Yeah, so
Okay.
these are things that are throughout the world, and they have different sort of names for the gods and individuals, but they're talking about the same beings and what's going to happen. So it's important to understand that what we get told is what they want us, how they want us to interpret it. It has part of the truth, but not all of the truth. And they've led us down a stream of intergalactic versus interdimensional or interphysical Earth, and away from that. And we have all of this activity that goes on in Antarctica that they're not ready to disclose. We have all of this information that goes on with alien phenomena that they're not ready to disclose. You have Admiral Byrd going both to Antarctica and the North Pole into the inner hollow Earth. And this knowledge, whatever it is said to have the ability to overturn every preconceived notion. If that sounds familiar, that's the first headline an adept gets when he becomes an adept, that the knowledge he will now receive will overturn every preconceived conception. So it's a polytheist doctrine again.
And it all of what you're talking about rings the bell of how statements can be made like, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Yeah.
Right? It's like this great unveiling that they're going to subjugate the entire world to in a moment's notice, almost.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to kind of jot back to this idea of God is taking the underground realms very seriously. So seriously that when the Lamb is here in the flesh, the first thing he decides to do after the crucifixion is he's going down
in the earth.
Let's talk about, I mean, if God's taking it seriously and the words depicting it, it is imperative that we at least have a better answer and framework for what's going on here. And I know that you can help us with this.
Yeah, and when we look at in the earth, we have to be careful of that term. The only way you know is that specifically talking about in the earth is to take it back to the original language. And so
exactly,
some of the ones you could rule out, that is licensed by the translator, but other passages, and there are many, I won't go through them all, but they talk about in the earth, beings in the earth. And particularly in the end time, we get these passages of these beings in the earth. So that's why it becomes relevant as we get closer to the days of Noah and the
Well, even like
technology
the
in the end
language of
times.
under the Euphrates. Like, what do we do
Yes.
with that too?
Yeah. What do
Under
we
the
do with that? Yeah. With the four angels that are chained there that will be released. And so, again, we've been dumbed down. We've been told not to look at that. You can't believe what that says. Here's what it really means. That's the polytheist hermeneutic approach. That's designed to keep us dumb. And people buy into it all the time, and it allows them to believe anything that they want. So, in 1 Peter 3, when Jesus is still in the grave, he goes in the earth to the spirits who committed crimes in the time of the flood. That's the information that's being told us there. Well, who's in this prison? Well, in other passages like 2 Peter 2 and Jude 1:6, these are fallen angels that are in the pit prison for the crimes they did both before the flood and just after the flood, and that the crimes at Sodom were the same crimes that were done before the flood. So you can create a parallel there of what was being done was being done there again. So that would mean the offspring gods would also go to the pit prison. So that's why we don't see like Baal, and he's said to be killed as well. Well, you can't kill an immortal. El already went there. He's dead. Apparently Baal killed him, but you can't kill an immortal. But you can make them like Dad in this prison until they're going to be released in the end time. In Ezekiel 32, we get told of the strong ones in the pit prison. And that's El. These are angels or a god. But we also get told of the mighty ones that are there, called terrible ones, the Eritim. And these are the ones who did terrible things while on earth. And we get individuals that are named as part of these terrible ones that walk the earth, but there's more of them, and these are all locked into the sides of the pit prison. These are the evil, the worst of the disembodied spirits of the giants. When they were killed, they went directly there.
So this is literally an underground supermax prison.
Yes.
This is the worst of the worst.
And likely in another dimension versus within the physical aspect of the earth. And so this is where Jesus goes. And, I talk about in some shows that at that point in time, this is where Jesus basically tells them, when I am resurrected on the Sunday that's to come, the first day of the week, your rebellion is officially over. And that the archons, the archangels, the ones who run the council of the gods that we talked about, hierarchy, sacred assembly of archons, the rulers, arche, as it comes out of the Greek, had they known about the resurrection, they wouldn't have had Jesus crucified, according to 1 Corinthians. Okay, so they didn't know about that. Now he's there to say, here's what's going to happen. But people will say, well, you don't have that there, so you're just adding to Scripture. Well, that's where you have to put on your critical analysis hat and know that this has got to be understood in the context of the days of Noah, those crimes, and something new is going on here. Just as when Jesus is going to be resurrected, he's going to create a new body that can go interdimensionally, which couldn't happen before. You had to take your own oiketeria and make your own soul or body to be in the physical world. So something new is going to happen there. So if you now connect in Colossians 2 and in 14 to 15, you have a passage in there that's going to talk about these principalities and powers, right? And that Jesus, with the cross, was going to openly and did openly show he triumphed over them. So these are talking about the ones that he's talking about in there. And this comes in a passage that's talking about, and he's making a spectacle of them in Colossians. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But this is a passage where that was 14 and 15 in Colossians 2. In verse 18, You have a passage of saying, do not worship angels and the rudiments of the world, which are the elementals as they're recorded in Galatians,
Exactly.
right? So that's
Exactly.
part of the spurious offspring, part of the physical sort of hierarchy, right? So there's something more going on here. And that and so you got the time of the cross located. We have the physical and the spiritual rebellious hierarchy, and then you move over to 1 Ephesians 4:8, and it's going to talk about Jesus who took the captivity captives, which is very difficult, weird kind of language, and he paraded them out when he ascended on high. So it's talking about in the time of the resurrection. And we get a passage in the book of Judges in 5:12 where it talks about the same term, captivity captives, and it means prisoners there. It's marching out the prisoners. The prisoners of the pit prisons are being marched out to be made a spectacle of. Okay, so now it's building, but it doesn't end there. That's the great thing
Oh my
about this
gosh.
is that um, Paul is actually quoting when he uses captivity captive, he is quoting Psalm 68. And that whole chapter of Psalms 68 is about the parading and the spectacle where the enemies of God are taken to where? Mount Hermon, Bashan.
Yeah.
And sentence is
Yeah.
pronounced on them. And all of this information is presented through all the way out in Psalm 68. So in 68:15, you're going to have the hill of Bashan, which is Mount Hermon. Mountain, as the hill could be mountain of Bashan. And Bashan is the region. And this is where judgment is pronounced on them. And then he takes them back to the prison because they're not going to be released until the end time. So I won't walk through all of the details because it's almost like a show in itself with all the little details, but you get the understanding of this, and that this is something that is crossing dimensions while Jesus is still in the grave before he has resurrected. And then when you think about when did Jesus ever go to Mount Hermon? Well, he does, to Caesarea Philippi. Probably butchered Caesarea or Caesar Philippi. It's something to that effect. Um,
Caesarea Philippi, if I
Caesarea
remember
Philippi,
correctly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is at Bashan. That's at Mount Hermon. And where does he declare his church? Right there, where he's going to build his church, authorizes the church. Anything that they're going to say or do on earth will be bound in heaven, full authority, and that even the gates of Hades will not prevail over them. So before, as he establishes his church, he's telling them, what I am going to do is going to convict you and finish off your rebellion. And he does that while he's in the grave. It's absolutely spectacular how the Bible works together in preternatural perfection.
Unbelievable. I mean, just the concept of these gates and these bars being broken, right? It's mentioned numerous times. It
Yeah.
really, and with everything being multi-layered, it's not too far-fetched to say, well, we're getting iron or any metals from the earth. It's typically scattered, needs to be collected. So in my mind, I'm hearing these gates and these bars being broken and bashed in. It's almost like the strength of the earth itself, the rebellion that's within the earth, right? And that
Yes.
counterpart is like, if the earth is moaning and groaning for identity, like we're made of the Ethrets, right?
Yeah.
We're made of the earth ourselves. So it's very prophetic for us even to be coming into understanding of these things.
Yeah.
Gary,
Well,
it's just phenomenal what you're laying out here.
what the book of Enoch tells us is that there is a place where God can put his throne there and visit
David
anytime he
even mentions
wants.
this minutely.
Yes. Yeah. And there's nothing that those fallen angels can do about it as God decides to go into their realm.
Exactly. David says, if I make my bed in Hades or Sheol, maybe,
Yep.
where can I go away from your presence? This is phenomenal. So not only is God Yahweh, the one true God, worthy of being omnipotent, omnipotent, omnipresent, and so much more than just the titles that we can try to use to wrap our heads around him, but it falls back to the parable. It's the parabolic language of those who spread the net to trap someone fall into their own device. And it's very interesting to see God reversing from Hermon to him going down right from the transfiguration and all of these different events going down into the earth
Yes.
and preaching this, hey, third day, I'm coming up, man. You
Yeah.
guys are done.
Yeah.
You didn't see it coming. It's just a phenomenal story. I think
Yeah.
it should be the billboard of Christianity. We should be saying like, nothing's new. He was crucified before the foundations of the earth. So we could talk about the pillars or that language, the foundation and that stacked existence of the earth, right? And he's conquering it all. But it really is coming down to the beauty of us speaking his name every day. And then he's writing our name in a book, right? And it's like those who are willing to seek it out and try to grapple with it. I love when you show up because you get my wheel turning the best way possible, Gary.
Well, and so as we look at the end time, we have to look at that the whole earth is in rebellion. And it's an interdimensional period of rebellion against God and anything and anyone who is on the other side. Like it is the ultimate. And the fallen angels know their time is limited. Because as Jesus said in Matthew 25, like the lake of fire is reserved for the devil and his angels.
And the demoniac are saying it's not the time yet when the Christ is walking, right? Do you think that this is pointing to? So how are they aware of that time slot? Or do you think there's certain things that need to line up where these fallen angels under the river Euphrates, right? We have a supermax prison, things built into the side, literally harboring these immense criminals from a times past in the antediluvian.
So
what are they looking for?
They're looking for to move things into the days of Noah sooner. They want this showdown. And we have to understand that understanding of the days of Noah, both before and after the flood. And there were giants both before and after the flood. There was great technology being applied at Babel. We need to understand that. That's why God would intercede there. And what's interesting in the Akkadian version, and we may have covered this on a past show, the Akkadian version of the Tower of Babel, it's Babalu. That doesn't mean confusion of languages, but in the Akkadian version or the polytheist version, ILU is a transliteration of EL for an angel or a god, and Bab is a gateway or a portal.
The gateway.
And
oh my gosh! So,
so
the
now
portal
you're
or
building
gateway of a god.
Yeah, a ziggurat on a place that would have extraordinary power with angelic technology that could go interdimensionally. Right? So God intercedes again. And if we look at geomancy, which is, has a lot of different meanings in the occult, but how does it deal with the modern aspect as we're starting to learn? Throw away, looking for water, or throw away, divination of geographical features and figures and lines. Well, no, maybe not that one, because that might have an association where these places are, where they have the great ley lines and powers that you would have for the pyramids. And be aware of what's going on with the discoveries under the pyramids today. It also means the arranging of buildings and other sites, arranging in a specific pattern for technology and for worship and for other aspects, right? But here's the key. It is also used for finding and changing the energy flow of the earth, geomancy. And a geomancer is understood in the occult as a gatekeeper who can create portals between worlds. So this is that knowledge religion that's coming to play. And people might say, well, you've done a lot of assumptions about what happened before the days of Noah. You have no proof of this sort of technology, except that we're still catching up to that, but fine. But there is a little bit of proof here and there for this technology, and understand that those who rule this world, they want to keep us like mushrooms. Otherwise, if that many people, because there's only like 1% of them that really control the world, or whatever that number is, they would lose control. So there's a FOIA request that I like to talk about every once in a while, and I don't know whether I've done it on your show or not, but I've had it for a number of years, and I kind of
It
keep
doesn't
it.
really ring a bell.
I kind of
Yeah.
keep it happy. That's the printout, and that's the full pages where it comes out. This
Okay.
comes out of the U.S., and it was done by a person by the name of Denetra D. Senegar, who worked in the Hillary Clinton office. And a quick history is that Hillary Clinton, wife of Bill Clinton, also was Secretary of State during the Iraq War. Okay, or in and around that period. And so, in the FOIA number is F-2019-02110. Okay, so I have a legitimate one that anybody can Google and actually have the links where you can click on it. You don't get the information that they got, but you can get what they were looking for. So it says Denetra D. Senegar requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh. Resurrection chamber. That's angelic technology that could bring somebody from the dead or repair them. What other technology would be associated with that angelic technology? And they also wanted to know the location of his body and the location of the buried Nephilim.
Okay.
Now,
So like
why
a
would you want the bodies, the DNA? You'd want that DNA for making a modern giant Jurassic Park sort of scenario.
So a chamber. You know, it's
Yep,
interesting looking at
sarcophagus.
a sarcophagi, and it's like a healing bed
Yeah,
almost. And what do we see? The counterpart, a quantum med bed,
yeah, we're
right?
seeing the
Is
digital medical quantum bed that's going to be interdimensional technology
yes.
because it's quantum.
So it's almost like, all right, I don't know if I'm off track here, but I'm going to think just openly because I process by thinking out loud and speaking things, right? Which can get me in trouble sometimes.
Yeah,
But sometimes it's a good thing.
yeah,
This,
because the mind can be a little bit messy.
the line, definitely can be a little bit messy. This idea of the Fibonacci sequence or like this natural, you know, the 369, we see a lot of
Yeah,
this perversion within the occultic realm.
yeah,
It's almost like they're trying to perfect and build within a natural state where it can almost be cloaked or it
yep,
can exist with a authority of some sort, right? Like after the kinds, we know when we're reading the Bible, each after its kind, and we know that there's a big problem, right? For the mixing and the mingling and the chimeras. They know that's a big no-no. Read the book of Enoch, right? We're going to go copulate with women. We're going to teach them about all these cool things. And they're like, so I think that they're trying to get it as close as possible to almost cloak it within these parameters of the natural state that God made it, and then get man who has dominion involved in superseding this spiritual legality over,
yeah,
right? And then they're trying
corrupting it,
to, I feel like
corrupting
they're
it.
corrupting it. I feel like they're walking this tight line of how much can we get away with and what results in the most corruption possible.
Yep,
Well, right? Does that
yep,
even make sense? I mean,
yeah.
it's kind of messy,
Remember
but
that before the flood, and one of the reasons for the flood is the whole earth and all flesh was corrupted. That means, that's a Hebrew word shakoth, that means to destroy, to ruin, to pervert, to decay. That would mean all the DNA, all the genomes, and anything else to do with what grows on the earth. It's been corrupted. And there's a way of doing that without sort of the sledgehammer approach with, you know, pollution and stuff like that. That's one way, but that's not high tech, right? We need to think differently here when we're talking about
storing,
quantum and DNA
yes,
and interdimensional, and that they believe that both the universe and the earth, so in this physical world, is a cryptogram. So you need currency that goes interdimensionally, you know, cryptocurrency, okay, geomancy. That things you start to see these terms coming and working together, you know, we're getting closer. And these are codes that are encoded into the universe through sacred geometry and and mathematical, which is why the alignment, sacred geometry, and everything else within the geomancy is at work and at play to tap into the powers of the earth. And they also believe that goes along with this is that the earth is essentially sentient. I don't know whether that's true or not. I can't say one way or the other. But when the earth groans, you wonder about that. But that's could be just allegory. So, but the earth is sentient and it is intelligent. So there's an intelligence that you're wanting to be able to tap into that runs the earth
Well, there's
somehow to keep it
clearly,
working. And that just
yeah.
quickly to finish, and conforming to math, and it conforms to all of this sentient aspect, which is AI, and intelligence, which also goes with AI to a certain degree, and a similar sort of understanding that it conforms as AI does to mathematical, geometrical laws not yet understood by science. So there's a higher technology that taps into how Mother Earth, as they would allegor it as a god that would be responsible for the earth and all of that technology to run the earth. Just as in the book of Enoch, we get angels and responsible for all sorts of different aspects of how the earth and the physical world works. Think about it in that sort of manner, about this technology that they're trying to tap into with all of this geomancy and crypto sciences. And I have to say that when you see Superman, whose name is Kal-El, which is, and you understand that Nimrod became a Gibborim, Nimrod, Kal-El, Gibbor. And his name isn't Clark Kent, it's Kal-El. And his father is Jor-El of the House of El. They come from the planet Krypton. You
But
have to
on,
understand
yes.
they've layered their knowledge into a simple little piece of entertainment. And
Mm.
that goes to the heart of their history, their genealogy, and what they're trying to bring back.
And that's so fascinating because with the whole Superman idea there, the Uberman, right, is
Yeah,
that Superman is normal on his home planet,
yeah,
right? Because the dimensional,
yeah,
um, the way things work there are different. But when he comes
yeah,
here,
yeah,
right, when he's introduced to Earth,
yeah,
he's super strong. He's got
yeah.
laser vision. He's got all this stuff. So it's
And
really
and
interesting with that.
he's a dragon messiah.
A
He's
dragon,
a,
exactly. Which
and
is interesting
understand
about this
that.
concept between the spirit realm and the walk-ins, right? Like they're looking for a template to, or a body, prophetically, for a walk-in, a
Yes.
presenter to
Yep.
come and bring some of the abilities of a different dimension here. And he's going to call
Yes.
down fire. And he's going to, I mean, this is crazy. The connections are great.
Yeah. And you look at that serpentine S on there. Baal and El were Uraeus gods, serpentine flying gods, dragon gods, seraphim, watchers.
Now, Gary, what do we do with this? Because obviously the Asian culture is associated heavily with dragons, dracons, right? These
Yeah.
flying serpents. You can't get away from them, man. And this is a conversation I want to have with you in the future about
Yeah.
dinosaurs. But I want
Yeah.
to set it up like we did the Cynocephali series. Remember, we did 2 parts on
Yes.
Dogman, and that was
Yeah.
next level too, man. But all right, so why are they called the dragon people? And what is being concealed maybe in those lands? I think about the Himalayan mountains,
Yeah.
laying. And when you look at it from certain angles, it might look like a dragon Nephilim giant laying on his side. There's a lot of connections with the dragon people that come out of Asia.
Yeah.
Why do you think that that culture is so deeply entangled with the dragon philosophy and
So
imagery?
in their prehistory, they have watcher gods, and there's a few. There's like Tengu gods, um, and part in the Tengu gods. Sometimes you get them as bird-like gods and dog-like gods, but typically
Yeah.
the dragon creator gods are serpentine dragons, heavenly dragons. Seraphim are six-winged serpent-faced dragons. Dragon creator gods are watchers. Seraphim are watchers. Watchers, as it shows up in Daniel 4, they're in charge of the earth, both through the religious sort of aspect and the governance sort of aspect. They populate most of the polytheist pantheons at the top. So the Uraeus gods, Osiris was a Uraeus god, so was his consort. So are all of the Baalim, mostly Uraeus gods or serpentine gods. You have the Nagas in China. You have the feathered and plumed serpents in the Popol Vuh in Central and South America.
Quetzalcoatl, isn't he
Yeah,
South American
yep,
feathered serpent,
yep.
if I'm
These are
remembering correctly?
all
Wow.
seraphim. Rebellious seraphim. Now, they're the ones, as the sons of God, who populated most of the Nephilim. Not all, because cherubim, I think, also did, and maybe other watchers. But they tended to, when they took a physical form, they would be worshipped in their serpentine manner, which is why they populate most of the pantheons as the dominant god. Right? So when they took a physical form, they created their own oiketerion, meaning a dwelling place for the spirit, and they left their habitation in heaven, oiketerion, dwelling place for the spirit. So there's a heavenly oiketerion and a physical oiketerion, just as 2 Corinthians
Absolutely.
5:2 talks about. The house in heaven we groan for, and
Yes.
the house and that house in heaven is oiketerion, meaning dwelling place for a spirit.
And this is
It,
where Jude talks about the disrobing of the former estate, the Okaterion there in Jude.
yes, that's exactly where it is. And so they're going to need to create a soul and a body which is of the physical world for their spirit to merge into, to interact physically in this world. Just as in Hebrews 13, we can run across an angel unaware, so we want to be nice to strangers. Just as Elohim, Jehovah the Elohim, who became physical to visit Abraham and took 2 angels who became physical to visit Abraham. And at first he didn't recognize them. He only understood them as men, but then understood them as who they were. And just as those 2 men went to Sodom and Gomorrah to judge, and they knew they were angels in men form, they can take a physical form. If you can take a physical form,
What markers identified them? So when the people were seeing them, or when Lot sees the
probably
angels,
became the shining aspect of them.
okay, so glowing of some sort.
And just as the offspring were shining people, it's part of the traits passed on. So when you take a physical form, you can pass on DNA. So now if a dragon watcher creates with a human female a giant, it would look just like them in the serpentine aspect of it. So in the antediluvian epoch, the kings are called in the text serpents and shown in statues as serpents because they're the direct offspring of the original Uraeus type serpentine seraphim god who created most of the giants. And then after the flood, you have the same thing going on, either with giants surviving or a second creation. And the Baalim created the Rephaim giants, according to the Ugaritic text. So seemingly the post-diluvian creation of these giants, and that these giants, took over the kings and the top 2 classes, both before and after the flood. So roll that forward to 1,000 years after the flood to Akhenaten, part of the Amarna dynasty. If you Google a picture of him, you're going to see somebody that's basically got a serpentine head because he's a descendant of a seraphim watcher, but he's got human aspects too because there's a fertility issue with them after the flood. They can't produce enough females to shorten the story, and they have to intermarry to a certain degree with humans lest they go extinct. So over 1,000 years after the flood, you get this long protruding chin, very high cheekbones, these large wraparound eyes that would glow and light up a room, and this big cone head, this elongated skull, usually covered with a hat, but not always. You can Google ones with each. And you look at that picture, particularly from the side, it's a seraphim serpent face. So why did they call themselves dragon people? Because they're the descendants of a specific celestial mafia godfather of the seraphim rank and of a specific offspring that looked just like them.
That is wild. Now, as you're talking, I'm also thinking with the dragon being at the top of the pantheon and many of these depictions, intercultural, different ways, it's almost like the Asians embrace the dragon because it's not limited to the surface of the earth or
Yeah,
under the earth.
yeah,
So there's almost like a pecking order.
yeah.
And I start thinking now about the Great Wall of China, which I've thought about many different times. And, it's almost like they're embracing the dragon because it wasn't limited to the ability to hinder these foot soldiers, right? And as far as stuff goes underneath the earth, there's plenty that we can continue to entertain there. But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Does all of the dragon language tie back to the serpent in the garden being a Nahash, a shining one?
I think
Because
that's a
that's
separate being.
is okay. So let's separate those two. And because which one's working for what one, or what do you think the order is here? Because somebody's clearly carrying out an order, a created beast, wiser than all the other beasts,
Yep.
that's in the garden already. Adam
Yep.
and Eve are not surprised by this creature. Oh my gosh, it can talk. No, it's very normal. Like, hey, we met up and we're having a conversation. It's business as usual. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the Nahash is a word that is in Hebrew meaning serpent. It's also a word that has a source word that carries some of the meaning with it as a derivative. And that can mean a necromancer, a sorcerer, a wizard, something in the priest class. The Gnostics believe that the serpent being was taller than a human, actually the size of a camel, and could do all of the work for humans, and was at the apex before Adam, even above the people of day 6. So, um, without getting into the analogy of day 6 in terms of two creations, because that's a show in itself, but
Next
understand
time,
the
Gary.
details. Yeah, next time. Understand the details are completely different. Um, and I don't believe the Bible is in contradiction. And we don't know how far after Eden is from day 7. So there's no day 8. So that's been inferred by other people who try and get into and mix up the argument, so to speak. But what's interesting is this serpent is a beast of the field. So it's not Satan. The beasts of the field are also created on day 6. But before male and female, created in multiple numbers and told to migrate around the earth. So a different kind of creation than Adam, and no special life being breathed into them for a special purpose by Jehovah the Elohim, who isn't shown in Genesis 1. He's introduced as Jehovah or Lord God, Jehovah of the Elohim. And he's the one who creates Adam and will be the one that interacts with us and then becomes flesh as Jesus. Okay.
It's very
So,
interesting, Gary.
but he also says, I am in Genesis 1. He says, I am the light in the darkness that the darkness didn't recognize in 1:3 after we've been introduced to the Ruach of the Elohim, the Spirit of God. And you have El Elyon there as the one who speaks. And it's when it says God said, that's Elohim Amar. Amar, speak word. That's Jesus. So Jesus is declaring himself to be there and the one who creates at God's command. He's the word of God, the word logos of the God Theos. And so you have on day 6 the serpent being created, and then you get humans. Well, how long is a day? We don't know. You could have a gap between day 7, or you could have even a longer period. And 2 Peter 3 says a day is like 1,000 years.
There could be a multi-gap. I don't think it's a
Yeah,
one-way argument that
could
there's
be
a
multiple
singular
gaps.
gap
Yeah,
theory. There's a multi-gap theory
yeah,
that is just as easily arguable.
yeah. And people will say, well, clearly a day is when the sun comes up and it goes down. Well, I would remind people that the sun isn't in place until day 4,
Exactly.
right? So are you now saying the sun
So day
wasn't
one,
in
two, and
effect
three
on
are
day 1?
defined.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you
so is
can't
the
play both
MO
sides of the field. Yeah, exactly.
should we
Exactly.
now understand that as only 1,000 years, or now it changes because he's created the lights within the firmament?
And it very well could be
Probably
both,
not, but you
Gary.
could. So I'm
It
open to
could,
that as
but
well.
when God introduces the first a day being right, sun going up and darkness coming, the sun setting, that could be just an integrated standard of how to calculate days moving forward. But
Yes.
it doesn't mean it was restricted to that same measurement of operation
Yes.
day 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. And God is consistent. So what he's setting down for
Absolutely.
man is different than what God does and how that affects man or how long it seems for that to take place.
Or
So
is time measured in the spirit realm? You know, I don't think that's a good
well,
question.
yeah, it's a great question, and we don't know, but it still seems to be linear somehow, some way. But maybe that's how it plays out in the physical world. But if you get into time and time travel, I guess that would be sort of theoretically possible, but may not be permitted. But again, how does that affect the dimension of heaven? We don't know.
Well, we think about prophecy. So when God is speaking either through dream, vision, through the ephod, still small voice, any which way he decides to deliver this information, you got to think it's almost circumvented maybe in the spirit, and then we assume it to be moment by moment,
Yeah,
kyrios, chronos, right?
yeah,
Linear in the
yeah,
physical, because the prophecy thing, I'm thinking about this from a time travel standpoint, but not a Hollywood futurist,
yeah,
movie
yeah,
time travel. Like, so God is speaking the beginning from the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He is, right? He knows all this stuff. So when he's whispering something to you, an event that didn't happen yet,
yeah,
even though that event would be tied in with this poetic idea of Hebrew being circumvented, it still is, it didn't happen exactly the way that God's going to cause it to happen again. So there's a part of the triune nature of man that almost interacted with a time travel scenario where, because when I hear things, Gary, I see stuff. I'll watch mini movie clips in my own mind. I'm very, what do you call this? Picture oriented, right? So I'll see things
yeah.
pictographically. And so it just makes me think in that sense of prophecy and time travel, are they once again, like you talk about, controlling the language war, controlling the narrative so that you're limited to the context of what they are okay you understanding certain things in?
To a certain degree,
Sure.
but certainly the fallen angels don't have the same power God has. And God certainly, and Jesus
Not even
certainly, and the Holy
close.
Spirit is outside of time or above time.
Exactly.
So there's a
Exactly.
distinction there and a distinction of knowledge and power. Yeah, and who knows what goes on in the heavenly realm in terms of how that operates. But obviously, God is in complete control. Fallen angels do not get out of line in heaven, even when Satan goes to report. He is minding his P's and Q's when he's going there because he knows the power of God.
So all right, let me bridge this because let's keep the underground thing or the stacked idea of Earth going. When Satan goes in the Book of Job, when God says, "What have you been doing? What you up to?
Yeah,
What's going on,
yeah,
buddy?"
yeah,
And he's like, "Hey, I've been traveling to and fro,
yeah,
up and down
yeah,
on the earth." So he's answering correctly and honestly. He's not
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
mess with God, and God
yeah,
receives the answer. So
yes.
does this connect back to maybe the wormhole or the portal or the underground type conversation? What are we?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and is it just the Earth that he's going? Is he just restricted to the Earth, or is he can go through the whole universe? We don't know. But I think certainly within the firmament for sure, he would be permitted to go. Um, but I don't know that. But I'm just sort of deducing that. And who knows? Maybe he can go outside the firmament. Maybe he has that
Very
technology
interesting.
to do that. Again, it's not all that clear. So I wanted to sort of go back and to finish on what's going on with this serpent. So
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
let's
Yeah.
say there is 1,000 years there. Let's just use this as an example, or you could do this after day 7 as well. But there's 1,000 years for the serpent and the serpent people to populate the earth. And they become under the control of the fallen angels. Now, according to Romans 5, there's no law here. Law is not introduced until Adam is introduced. And when there's no law, it's imputed. In other words, there's no consequence. Doesn't mean there wasn't sin going on. Doesn't mean the angels didn't rebel, but there was no law until God put in the law of you can't eat from one tree. That's it. One rule that we couldn't manage. And so you have this priest-like kingly dragon figure that was deemed to be a favored being of the seraphim who govern the earth. Things start to make sense a little bit in terms of the imagery, and that we're not specifically told how the Nahash is created. So is there now going on in that period of time some sort of DNA manipulation or something going on to create an image after the likeness that's walking, talking, and intelligent to work on behalf of the Seraphim Watcher angels, who are going to be very much committed to the fall of Adam and Eve, because they're going to receive all of the blessings the humans are in day 6, and the Messianic promise and the eternity promise that is going to go along with that special commission of the first Adam. And so now things start to make a whole lot of sense. Why would this serpentine intelligent being want to be helpful with Satan to bringing down Adam and Eve? Because it would lose its power and its status in a already polytheist world, and nothing is new as under the sun. So now the creation of the giants afterwards, and in that serpent seed imagery through Seraphim Watchers, that's where you're going to have that seed war begin, that you have to sort of factor in both spiritually and physically, and that all of a sudden everything starts to fall into place.
Man, that's so well said. Very fascinating.
And if that was a superior race that was in charge, just as the Nephilim took over, right, and controlled all of the religious aspect through the bloodline priests, whether they're Brahmins and Druids, understand that that's part of the organizational structure, then all of the people of day 6, by the time of the creation of Adam, likely had become polytheist as well, as nomads and gatherers, around the earth. And it's Cain who's going to now introduce agriculture to the nomads, because he learns that from Adam, who ran this massive, gigantic agrarian plantation from the Nile to the Euphrates, from Mount Hermon to the Sea of Aqaba and Indian Ocean. So things start to, again, sort of fall into place with all of the details if you have two separate creations, and that nothing is new under the sun. So you have another intercession by God there to accomplish what needs to be done. And still everything is being played out through free choice.
Okay, so I've entertained quite a number of conversations with Dan Duvall on these antediluvian and the pre-Adamite spirit realm, and listen, the text is suggesting much more. I think it's even weirder than what we're hinting at. But one of the things I do want to point out here quickly before I just hand it back to you to kind of keep pontificating and diving into this stuff, if there's two different creations of man, there's almost two different frequencies that man creation would be resonating at. Because the one where God breathed the metanoia, or he's breathing that spirit into, on the two different accounts that you're talking about.
Yeah.
One specifically says he's breathing a metanoia, a spirit into that man. We know, once again, Nikola Tesla was on it back in his day. Light, frequency, sound. This is basic scientific observation. When you have a cup and then you have, glass, and then you have something made of wood, they're reacting differently. So it is very interesting about the bloodlines mingling these two together, and what God calls Noah Tamim. He's righteous, pure. Tamim, I think, is the Hebrew word that means without blemish.
Yep.
The same word we would use for a spotless lamb.
Yep.
And it is interesting to now think about that in the context of like how all of it ripples out into all these other areas of cause and effect. It all fits together.
Yeah.
It starts to become clear. You're right.
Yeah. And the original people of day 6 may not have had the ability to be resurrected in that spirit.
Interesting.
And there's different kinds of spirits. There's spirits of humans, of animals, of
Absolutely.
angels,
Yeah.
and of the tripartite nature of the godhood. And so when we look at fallen angels not knowing there's going to be a resurrection, which is why they want to have Jesus killed, all of a sudden now that breathing in of that spirit takes on a whole new understanding as a possibility, and that through that first Adam, and even though it's the same word as used in day 6, it's a derivative of another couple Adam words. So without getting too deep into the minutia of the Hebrew, so Adam's a name for the new, but he's obviously part of the same species, right? And so you also have to account for 4 races that are going to show up after the flood. And so I think that happens likely with the wives of the 4 races. And because we have the sons, we know the genealogy, but we don't know the wives. And I'm saying they're probably, spiritually free and not contaminated as well through DNA manipulation and other things as well to start. And that this now makes sense from how things are legally passed on because Eve is the mother of all living. Living is
Exactly.
understood as the ones who can be resurrected. And with that intermarriage and through the lineage and the blessings, that now sets up downstream the ability for the resurrection, for continued living, to be raised up to be like angels, even though we have human fathers.
Well, I mean, this fits, all of what you're saying fits right into this narrative I'm listening to and watching and listening to in my head, of the sense of those who are gods hear his voice,
Yeah.
right? And then we have Pan, this god that we get pandemic and pandemonium, and right, and he's responsible for playing a frequency
Yep.
that would cause disruption, disorder, chaos, murder, whatever you want to call it. And it's like, are we talking about certain DNAs that are, or certain created standards, right, being more susceptible to the enemy's attack? Maybe they
Yes,
can be
but
used
just
as
from the
walk-ins
from the physical
from the
aspect
physical.
versus the spiritual aspect.
Correct. That's so interesting, Gary.
And
So,
when Jesus came, when he gave the allegory of him as the good shepherd,
yes,
is that the sheep follow him because they can hear him and they
they know
recognize
his
who he is.
voice.
Yes. And Jesus, when he comes back as the breaker, to redeem Israel and lead in second Exodus, he's going to call them by name, even though they've been lost into the tribes. They're going to awaken, and he's going to call them back by name. So there is a resonance there that if you and I think all people can hear God if they choose to. But you have to continue to hear, right? You
You
have to
have to,
listen.
yes,
And,
hearing the word of God, which means to lean
yeah,
into, to
yeah,
absorb.
yeah.
But it
And I
also says
also
that all
think,
creation, no one can say that they didn't know God to the extent
yes,
of creation is screaming his existence
yes.
regardless.
And if you look at the descendants of the giants and the Rh negatives that sort of comes up through the genes passing on that blood type versus how, it's because people say you can't insert a negative into it because it's missing the D antigen. Well, it's the gene that passes on. And through the mother in their belief system, as we talked about with that fertility sort of issue, is that they believe that with that gene, and they have different genes, whether it's the LB gens or the credit gens or the Julia gens, and on and on and on of these gens is back to specific Nephilim and Rephaim patriarchs that would go back to a specific celestial mafia godfather or godmother, is that they will have more paranormal experiences and that they will have more communication or alien encounters. and
Oh
all sorts of
man.
things on that sort of wavelength, that, and more dreams with these with spiritual beings and things like that. So there could be that resonance through the gene that people will, in polytheism, feel that physical call more than others. Just as
That's
with
so interesting.
Christians, you might feel the call. Well, I mean, I think God can overrule anything, so anybody can hear God's call if you're willing to listen.
Well, I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that. I mean, it it's the it's ringing the bell of those who are raised to know
Yep,
the Lord. Right? What does
yep,
the
yep,
parable say? It's like
yep,
raise the child in the way that
yep,
they should go,
yep,
and when they get
yep,
older, they will not depart from it.
yep. Now,
But then you have the
here's
prodigal son story.
you do, but if I can just finish, because this is
Please do.
so important to understand the analogy that was put down in that Good Shepherd analogy. Understand that sheep are essentially blind. They can see, but they're blind.
Yeah.
And this is the analogy for humans, because we're being blinded by those who rule this world. But their hearing in the sheep is extraordinary. And that's what they've used to follow the shepherd. And that's why that whole analogy is just so perfect. And so you have to lead from in front, just as Jehovah of the Elohim led second Exodus, he will lead as he led first Exodus, he will lead second Exodus, and you can't lead from behind. You can't lead from invisibility, as the invisible hierarchy is trying to do for God's people. And understand, all names are written in the book of life. We all have the ability to leave that name in or have it blotted out. So who are you listening to?
Gary, that is phenomenal. I mean, look, with the time we have left, there's one thing I got to bring up, and this is going to be a dramatic shift. Okay, I listened. Obviously, my buddy Pete over at the Days of Noah. Shout out to him. We were having conversations off air about the aquatic episode, right? And then
Yeah.
he knew he had you scheduled, and then he, kind of started going into this conversation that landed to hermeneutics with you. And you haunted me with that conversation, Gary. So I'm going to spend maybe the last like 20 minutes just kind of helping me to understand that, because this is a major for me. And not to take away from the late Dr. Chuck Missler at all. Okay, I think we all have a little something wrong and we all have a little something right. That's my quote. But he did talk about hermeneutical hygiene, right? And so when I heard you dismantle hermeneutics and what you understand about it, I mean, I agreed, but then I said, what word would we use in place to talk about maybe precision or a healthy approach to be genuine to the literal
Yeah.
translations of the scripture? What Open it up. What's going on with Hermes and hermeneutics
Yeah.
and all of this different
Yeah.
stuff? Let's just hash this thing out for a minute.
So hermeneutics is, if you get into prophecy and discussions, people will roll out this wall. The hermeneutics will tell you this, and they use it as a superior position, and you can't argue against it because you're blaspheming and doing all sorts of horrible things. Well, hermeneutics is something we want to be careful of, and it gets blended in something we should be aware of, which is called topology. And topology is the understanding of like things. And topology in the Bible is what we use to define allegory and events, and particularly doctrines and prophetic events. So that it will use the same type of imagery, the same type of key words, and give you definitions to the allegories and things like that. Hermeneutics is what people would have been taught to use. It's what I call, and the Bible would call, and I linked them together, it was the wisdom of the world from the Gnostic religions, the wisdom religion that wants to lead us away from God and to keep us dumbed down. And what people do with hermeneutics is they use it to rightly divide scripture through the Holy Spirit. Now, I'll link this all back in quickly, is that the Holy Spirit would never contradict what Jesus said. right? And so they use it to redefine what Scripture says, and they add on to it because they're rightly dividing through hermeneutics.
Exactly.
So when they say that, they infer. They will tell you something means something, and it's not there. But you have to understand hermeneutics. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, it's the allegory of what that means. But that allegory isn't from the Bible that they use to define it. And they use words like it infers this. And rightly they do, but they've been taught all of these talking points. Hermeneutics is a polytheist way of understanding polytheist history and religion. Because if you look at the way their history was recorded in the oral traditions, where you have the myths and the fables, everybody says, okay, I'm prepared to recognize there's some truth in there. Well, how do you access that truth? Through the allegories and the characters and the locations and anything that's taciturn that you can sort of make visually in there with that, as that comes down. And that has a meaning that the adepts in polytheism understand. Not the mundane in polytheism. You have to be an adept to understand that history and what that meaning is. And so it's used in something called humorism, which is trying to get the history out of the myth that was designed in Greek. And humorism is an extension out of the knowledge of Hermes, which hermeneutics is the etymological root for hermeneutics. Hermes is a wisdom god in Greek mythology. It's like Thoth, right?
My
And
God.
how hermeneutics comes into Christianity is in the Middle Ages. So it wasn't used in the time of Jesus. At least it shouldn't have been, but mostly in the monastic orders, which were the places where Gnostics mold into the church for protection and could continue and influence and introduce the interpretive approach.
Come on.
Hermeneutics is the interpretive approach. So you want to know whether or not you should be understanding literal or interpretive. Understand interpretive approach is the approach of polytheism, and they apply that to the Bible. And the Gnostic moles try and get you to say, well, it doesn't really say that. Here's what it really means. So this is the approach that then evolved into understanding end time prophecy, where they can take any passage they want, make it mean anything they want. Then there's no standard. So what you want to do is use topology. And when somebody says, well, the hermeneutics means this, you have to say back to them to counter them. If that is true, then provide the scripture that clearly says that.
Exactly.
Because everything is defined within the Bible. So if for example, and I don't want to pick on any one approach because I could pick on a number of them, but a lot of people will say the 24 elders in Revelation 4 and 5 infers the church will be raptured before the last 7 years. Okay, great. Sounds good. They got thrones, kind of has something to do with, it's a resurrection of some sort, but there's only 24. So how do you go from 24 to the whole church?
Interesting.
And you have to say, you have to stand your ground on this and say, until you produce scripture that says 24 elders represents the church, and elders can be part of the church, but you have to use the whole phrase there, 24 elders. And again, elders are never used biblically to represent the whole church. You have to provide scripture that says that. So if you're going to say in the same one that come up here is inferring rapture, you better support another passage that shows that that's the resurrection of the whole body of the church to define that. And understand that coming up there is like a standard MO that's used in vision prophecies, like with Isaiah, like with Ezekiel, like with John. And he's taken in spirit to see the vision from the angel that Jesus gave the angel to show him. So that's the difference that you want to be very, very careful of. And so understand that if you want to be misled on chronology, then I get that, because you're probably saying, I want to support what I want, how I want prophecy to come about,
We're
right?
all like that a little bit.
Yeah, we are, and we
Yeah.
have to be aware of our own
Yeah.
biases, which is why I have strict rules on to try and stay on it. And one of it is using the typology. You have to define everything within the Bible.
Exactly. And which I agree with so heavily. And so, I mean, just even your example, right? Being called up versus you got in the spirit going up and seeing a vision. And then you have, um, what is it? Enoch getting snatched up by a divine taxi or a chariot of fire. Like, so there's
Yeah,
different, for people to infer one for the other or get the cross members, the wires get
yeah.
tangled. It's a messy. It really is. And I wish that there was a really easy answer to get people all on the same page, but that's just not going to work. It really does point back to is our interest because we're hearing the voice of the shepherd? What is our postulation? What's the heart posture? Why do we
Yeah,
want to know?
yeah. And the way you really hear the Holy Spirit, I think, from my perspective, and to help guide you on this, is put everything around what Jesus said. And Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And do not rewrite what Jesus said. So as you get into the various eschatological approaches, they have to rewrite what Jesus said. Well, elect doesn't mean elect there. Well, when he comes in the clouds, that's at Armageddon, even though there's no Armageddon events there. They have to add things in, and they'll say, well, that's the second coming. That's not rapture. Well, does he come first for rapture? Yeah, well, wouldn't that be the second coming? Well, he's not, his feet are on the ground. Show me the scripture for his feet has to be on the
Exactly.
ground that says second coming.
Oh,
In
it's
fact,
so
show
good.
me second coming in the Bible somewhere. We only get one, what's where he appears again in Hebrews 9:28, and that's for salvation and reward, not wrath and vengeance and war. So the typology of those events you have to line up as well. And it gets a little bit critical when you get into the harvest. There's a harvest of the wheat and there's a harvest of the tares. And you have to use the events in the harvest and line that up for each of the two harvests, and not conflate it into one.
Man, that's so well said. Is there any connection with the sheep and the goat nation parable to the wheat and the tare? Is there any
Yeah,
like
it's the same type of sort of
same type of
allegory. Yeah. So
okay
again, it's
typology
the
almost, right?
Yeah, okay, and again, it's the sheep that hear the voice of God, and it's the goats that don't. And the goats are, following in the allegory after the flood, the satyr gods, which are the degraded seraphim.
The horns. Yeah,
Yes,
two horns. Isn't that
yes,
interesting?
yes.
Well, Gary, I think we're going to try to land this, okay? Because this is a fascinating conversation. And with as many appearances as you've had over the years, of course, some information gets tossed back up, but we know it's all based on this interconnectivity. So, any final kind of comments on this hollow earth and how it all plugs in and why it's all important? And then we'll do a plug-in for the books and things like that at the very end.
Yeah, so I think, when we look at the Bible, we have to look at everything that it talks about. And the Bible talks about hollow earth, both physically and interdimensionally, right through from the beginning to the end. And there's an interrelationship in our history and what's going to happen down the road. So keep in mind, in Revelation 9, when that pit prison is opened, there's more creatures coming out of there from that. There's other ones that are already here, but understand we have a direct impact of hollow earth, in this case, likely another dimension, coming to us. And those creatures, the terrible ones, are going to require oikotarians, some sort of chimera clone being for them to interact physically in the world. So the Bible gives us enough pieces put together if we want to put it together. If we choose not to put the puzzle together or not put all the pieces together, you don't get the picture. And Hollow Earth can't be ignored. It cannot be. And we need to understand with Hollow Earth that when I talked about a spirit, a soul, and a body as being distinct, and the soul and the body is of this world, the gods of this world can only offer godhood within this world and possibly in the earth or maybe in that sort of dimension, as witnessed through polytheist sort of history. And when we die, our spirit goes in a sleep state, not soul. Our spirit goes in a sleep state, so not soul sleep. Our spirit goes in a sleep state back to heaven, according to the book of Ecclesiastics, and we wait for whichever one of the resurrections we're going to come through in the resurrection sequence, which again, people have to put all the details together on the resurrection sequence of the first resurrection and understand that there's multiple parts to that. It's not hard once you put them together, but if you want to put it all in Revelation 24, then you have conflicts you can't sort of deal with, or you have to ignore them. So that the disembodied spirits, they don't go to sleep. They're counterfeit spirits of the fallen angels. So they're either going to be in the pit prison as the terrible ones, or be wandering the earth. And in polytheism, if they had enough knowledge, they already went to Hades or Sheol and became godlike. I don't know whether that parts are true or not, but all of this is interplaying in our world today. It's becoming more visible today. And I think we have to pay more attention to the preternatural nature of the Bible and throw off all of the dirt and the manure being fed to us as mushrooms, and know that our churches are not going to be the good shepherds. We're going to have to create our own good shepherds because they are part of the wisdom of the world. I'm not saying all ministers are bad. They've been taught not to teach prehistory and to prophecy, and they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And if we're in the fig tree generation, we're in a lot of trouble unless we raise up new flocks and understand that, if as a flock leader, you have to be at the front because they're going to hear your voice and follow. Whereas the goats, they are not as easily herded, right? You have to work at that a lot more.
No, and they're very violent.
And they can become violent if they don't like what they're hearing or what's being done to them. So,
Man, it's very well said, Gary. Listen, just as a teaser, right?
yeah,
Because you're going to come back again, and I think we're going to hint at, a couple of these really important topics that are going on with maybe the meat suit, the alien deception. I mean, I do want to talk about, some of the end time final deceptions that really feel like they're here. It doesn't feel like it's far away anymore. And I have a host of other great questions
yeah.
and ideas. But for right now, Gary, land us with where you can be found, where you prefer people pick up a copy of the book. Obviously, the newest book that we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, replug that. And
Yep. Yeah, so the best place to get a hold of me and to learn about my books is the Genesis6conspiracy.com, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 chapters of book 2. I do have a write-up in there about the Primo Conspiracy. I will put up more once the Audible version comes out and get the Kindle link up there. But you can also get, if you like what I say, you want to support me, you can go to the Buy Now page. And so this book here, The Primo Conspiracy, it is on page 3, and it'll say Opprimo Conspiracy. If you want to buy book 1, you go to buy page 1. If you want to go to buy book 2, you go to buy page 2. There's discounts for multiple books. Buy page 3 is the Opprimo Conspiracy. Buy page 4 is the bundling for books 1 and 2 with discounts. And buy page 5 is bundling for all 3 with discounts. And so you can link over directly from the website to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca for each of the versions of book 1 and 2. And soon, once I'll have the Kindle up there when the Audible is done, I'll do that all at once and put more excerpts in about the Primo Conspiracy. And if you like that book, and you want to know more about what's in the Opprimo, that's why you want to get books 1 and 2. And also look forward to a sequel coming out probably next year for part 2 of the Opprimo Conspiracy.
Amazing. And then we're still waiting on that Aquatic Kingdom encyclopedia that you're going to write in the future, Gary.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Hey, a couple chapters at least.
Yeah.
Man, it's always an honor. Dude, we did more than raise eyebrows today, okay? Because if there was more time, believe me, it would have got even weirder. But we're scheduled again for a couple weeks down the road.
We are.
The one and only Gary Wayne. Excellent, man. It's always an honor to get together with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's always fun to do a show with you.
All right, like, share, subscribe, you guys. You know the deal. You can help us beat the algorithm by sharing this with your fringe and strange friends, family members, coworkers, and with your pastor. And we're coming to you from southeastern Pennsylvania. God bless and goodbye.
That's right, trust no one.
Daylight, stay bright, you stay light. Daylight, you stay bright. Daylight, you stay light. You daylight, you stay light. You daylight, stay bright. It's better with you. Daylight, you daylight, you stay light, stay bright. It's better with you. It's better with you. All I want is you.
If I showed you the scars, would you turn away? If I lowered the walls, would you come and stay? If I open my heart, would you shine your light? If I let this thing start, hold me through the night. Canceled and brave, come take a ride with me. Let's take a look at all the things in life we're supposed to be. Look me in the eyes, I wanna see a light shine. Beauty and passion, just like it's the first time. Oh my baby, I'm a gentleman at heart. Unless you in the service of my enemy, a worker of the dark. I speak light words in heavy moments. Light in my eyes, staring back at dark opponents. Lord help me now.
You stay like you.